Welcome to Heart Talk Season 1, Episode 4. We are immensely pleased to welcome our honorable guest, Dr. Masood Raja. Dr. Masood Raja has left an indelible marks on the fields of post-colonial study. Dr. Masood is the author of several books, most recently Democratic Criticism. Dr. Masood Raja is a former associate professor of post-colonial studies and a public scholar. Dr. Raja's academic contributions are vast and varied. As a former associate professor of post-colonial studies, he has not only shaped the minds of countless students, but also contributed significantly as a public scholar, engaging with broader audience through his compelling writing and lectures. So thank you very much for being our guest, sir. Can you hear us?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks a lot. Thank you once again. Okay, now I will invite our two hosts, Ms. Masuma and Ms. Hafsa, the president of IIUI Literary Society. Please begin the session formally. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Thank you.
I'm pretty well. Let's begin with your fascinating career path. Could you please share with us your journey from serving in Pakistan Army to becoming a post-colonial critic?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the question. So, I went into Pakistan Army at a fairly young age, after 10th grade, which then we used to call metric. So went into the junior military academy, then the senior military academy. I was a second lieutenant by the time I was 19 and a half. So I was a career officer in infantry, but I always loved to read and write. That was always my passion from 8th grade on. So in the end, in 1996, I resigned my commission, and obviously it was love that caused that. And then coming to America, I still don't, and I never thought of America as the land of opportunity or something where I could go and become me. Love brought me here, and love keeps me here. My ex-wife had moved here, so the only way I could come quickly enough to United States was as a student. So that's what I did. But when I came and started studies here, I just fell in love with literary studies and continued on. So the marriage didn't last, but it made me into who I am. So that was like a transition from the Army career to becoming an academic and, becoming a literary scholar.
Moving on. Sir, your monograph, Constructive Pakistan, offers an innovative explanation of the genesis of the idea of Pakistan. So what was your inspiration behind this work?
I think my inspiration was a sort of embarrassment at our own history. Because when I read, I read the whole anti-colonial movement in India, and I was kind of really ashamed that the Muslims were mostly apologists for Britain, and they weren't very strident in their critiques of the British rule. So I had to understand that. I had to understand that discourse of loyalism. Where was it coming from? So then in constructing Pakistan, then I went back to 1857 rebellion. That's my starting point. And when I started reading the Muslim texts, especially Ghalib's diary, Dastanbu, which I read in Farsi as well as in English translation. So what emerged there was two ideas. One, that the Muslim national consciousness preceded that of Indian National Congress and the party politics. And the reason was that after the fall of Delhi, if you read Ghalib's Dastanbu, you will see most of us do not know that majority of the Muslim population was evicted from the city, and they lived in tenements outside the city. So the Muslims faced the brunt of the British ire after the rebellion. And the elite felt it tangibly that they are, a target. They will be, if they don't do anything, they will have no future in India under the British. So that's when they developed this discourse of loyalism, which you see in Sayyid Ahmad Khan's Asbab-e-Baghawat-e-Hind. That was my second chapter. Because in that he gives the reasons of the rebellion, but then he also implores the British that if you had used us, if you had talked to us, learned from us, you will be able to control, you would have been able to control the situation better. So he's rewriting the Muslims into the British hegemonic project. So that's when I understood that I was looking at it from a larger perspective of India. I had to look at it from the actual threats that the Muslims faced, after the rebellion. And so then I trace it through some literary texts and some political texts to the point of the rise of actual Muslim consciousness and the fight for a separate nation. So that was my project in that. It started with a kind of self-discovery in the process of finding out, we Pakistanis, we don't know our own history. And so many people who were crucial to our history, we have excluded them and we don't teach them. So, in the process I learned what a ragtag affair the Muslim League was. It was never really a coherent political party, and mostly it was filled with the opportunists. And if you have read Aisha Jalal's The Sole Spokesman, you will see how Mr. Jinnah, how much effort he had to put in to wrangle all these constituencies together. So that was kind of my point of inquiry in that book.
Well, shifting gears a bit, in your book on ISIS, you discuss ideology, symbolics, and counter narratives. So, what prompted you to explore such topics?
Well, so as a public scholar, my idea towards scholarship is that I don't believe in the scholarship of here is a novel and there are 3 characters in it and the 4th one is multidimensional. That serves no purpose in the world other than maybe making me sound really smart. So I always ground my work in the lived realities of the world in which we live and see, how can I either respond to what's going on or try to understand what's going on. So when I started thinking about my book on ISIS, part of the reason was that I didn't know much about them. So I wanted to know, what is it in the 21st century? Because the narrative here always is that Islam is causing that, and it's Islam. And my idea was, okay, what ideologies are they using? How are they reading the sacred texts and interpreting them? What are they retrieving from history? And so what is the ideological basis of this organization? How do they define themselves? How do they articulate their ideology and their lived experiences? My finding was interesting, but I'm not going to say it here because your school is funded by Saudi Arabia, so they'll probably not like it, but you can read the book.
Oh, okay.
Because, to be very honest, the ISIS will not be possible without the teachings of Abdul Wahab. So.
Oh, well, thank you for the answer. So, you have wonderfully explained. You have wonderfully dealt with the question, I must say. Okay, so I have seen that you have written about the issues of post-coloniality and political Islam. So what do you see as the intersection between these two fields?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I call political Islam is that, first of all, it's not a monolithic concept, right? Islam in North America is completely different. North Africa is completely different from Islam in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. The core principles might be same, but the practices differ in so many different ways. So political Islam to me is any organization or a nation or a group of people who use religion, in our case Islam, to define how to conduct their lives and how to conduct political life, right? And what do they read and how do they interpret it? So throughout, if you read any of my works, that's the quest, finding out, what purpose does religion serve and how is it mobilized? Because at the end of the day, religion does two things, right? It gives us a system of intelligibility. It gives us a system through which we understand the world, right, and our place in it. But it also then does more than that. It creates a subjectivity that then decides this is how we ought to live our lives and other people ought to live their lives too. That's when it becomes political. And Islam, of all the religions, is a deeply political religion. I mean, from the very start. So, so the quest has always been, first of all, how to understand it, the various permutations of politics in the Islamic world, and then how to make it intelligible to a Western audience, which is my audience, right? These are the people with whom I work. These are the people to whom I want to explain certain things about my primary culture, right? And so when you place yourself in that position, you have to come to it from a standpoint where you understand how it is perceived, how you understand it, and how the people in your native culture perceive it. And so you have to then know the discourse over here, the discourse in Islamic historiography, in Islamic philosophy, in the study of fiqh or whatever, and then maybe develop a voice through which you can say something. So that's what has been my quest.
Thank you so much for such an insightful answer. Your work often involves the Muslim sacred. So, how do you approach this sensitive subject in your scholarship?
So, I mean, think about it. There is no quintessential Muslim sacred, right? You don't walk into the street and the Muslim sacred walks up to you and says, I am the Muslim sacred, you must. The Muslim sacred is constructed through discourses, through what we consider absolutely sacrosanct, what we consider untouchable, unimpeachable, immutable, right? Most of the times, we have a cultural norm which tells us we don't say this, we don't say this, we don't say this, right? So my idea of the Muslim sacred is simply that by and large in all Muslim societies there is a little bit of consensus. What is it that you don't do, right? If you're a writer, you incorporate that in your repertoire, in your consciousness. Just as here we know how to use our vocabularies, what not to say, and so that's how we write. So within that, then, like the figure of the prophet, right? So we know as Muslims, now Saudis will not believe in it, but most other Muslims who come from the mystical tradition, the figure of the prophet is unimpeachable, right? We can't say things, or if we say things that are unkind or rude about the figure of the prophet, it's hurtful to us, right? It hurts us to the core. And surprisingly, in Urdu and Punjabi poetry, we can say whatever we want to God, no one gets angry. But the figure of the prophet is sacred in that sense. We don't worship him like people worship Jesus, but we believe that there is a certain degree of respect and decorum that must be used. So when I used the term in my recent book, it was that particular aspect of the Muslim sacred that the Western readers should not just say that we have absolute right of freedom. They don't. But they do not have the absolute right of freedom to say, I am going to play with your religion and you should like it, right? They should also track and trace the anguish that it causes and understand it, right? Because if they don't understand it, then it's an imperial act. They are saying our way is right, right? And that was my challenge to both to the East, so-called East, and the West. To the Western Academy is, if you're going to teach texts that have Muslim settings and Muslim characters, and if you're going to talk about them, don't talk about them unless you know about the Muslim meaning-making processes. How is it that an average Muslim subject experiences life, reads the text, and thinks about it? If you don't know that, then you're not qualified to teach a text about Islam, right? Just as I can't walk into a university classroom in the United States and say, I'm going to teach you literature, but what I learned in Pakistan from that person. No, I have to learn the meaning-making processes of the Western Academy. I have to know the culture and the nuances of language to be accepted as a serious scholar. So the same burden must be taken up by all those who want to teach courses that deal with Muslim subjects and Islamic themes. So that was kind of my emphasis in the last book.
That was truly insightful. These were all the questions that I wanted to ask. Now I would like to over to Masuma so she could continue the session further. Thank you so much for such an insightful answers. Over to you, Masuma.
The next question. Sir, you actively participate in public debates. So how important is it for academics to engage with the public, and what challenges do you face in doing so?
Okay, so first of all, I won't classify them as public debates. I do public dialogue. I don't debate people. I think debates are destructive. जिसको मनाजरा बोलते हैं ना, मनाजरा is like you want to win an argument. I do public dialogue where I say, this is what I think about this thing. If you don't think like that, that's fine with me, but here are my views. I believe increasingly that as humanities scholars, it is our responsibility to share the little that we know with the larger public, not to simplify it. I never make things simple, but I explain them in a language that an average person can understand them. That's my mission, right? So I absolutely always have trained my students to do the same, that we as intellectuals or scholars, we need to be connected to the world, and we need to live what we preach, right? If you are a feminist scholar teaching a course on feminism, then you ought to treat women like that too, right? You can't be one in a classroom and something else outside, right? So what it does then is, if you have a public presence, it makes you honest, because constantly, if you're not living up to what you're preaching, people will point it out to you, because that's the public sphere. No one holds back, right? But I think it's our responsibility, not from top down, not to say that people need to be educated. No, people usually know their lived experiences better than us. But to be in solidarity with people, right? To have people as your audience, because if you have people as your constituency, those are the people you work for, those are the people you write for, then power cannot appropriate you, it cannot buy you, because your loyalties are already committed, right? How does power appropriate intellectuals and professors and all? They will always only be able to appropriate intellectuals who are not committed to the public, because then they will go sell themselves to the highest bidder for a small post here, for a little raise over there, for a bigger chair in their office, right? But if you're committed to the people, then that's your North Star, right? And anyone comes to you and says, we have a lot of money, would you make this statement for us? And you think about the statement, whose interest does it serve? And if it serves the interest of the powerful, you already will tell them, no, I will not do that. So commitment to the public sphere, and to the people makes you, in my opinion, a more formidable scholar, a scholar with a constituency, but also a more committed scholar, because all your work then will be guided by whose interest does it serve. If I'm saying this or writing this, does it serve the interest of the powerful, or does it serve the interest of the people with whom? You never speak for the people as an intellectual, you speak with the people with whom I am speaking. So that's my guidance, and part of it came from my own training from my mother, but also from my dissertation directors and my professors.
Right, that's a wonderful answer, sir.
You have been involved in a partnership program between the University of North Texas and the National University of Modern Languages in Islamabad. So, what were the key outcomes of this partnership?
Okay, so the partnership was funded by Department of State, and it was a $1 million grant. And part of it was, there were a few things that they had requested and we had promised to deliver. So one of them was that we were going to make a writing research center on their campus, which we did. We trained about 40 people to be writing research center tutors. We had promised to bring 45 of their scholars to our campus in United States, each of them for a 6-week research stay. We brought 58 instead, more than what we had promised. And then there were other areas. So overall, I think the impact on my campus was that, every 6 weeks we'll get a new cohort in, and people got to know Pakistanis and Pakistani culture and Pakistani people in Texas, right? And on the other hand, Nomal, I think, benefited tremendously, because I went for 4 summers and taught a course. I always took a colleague with me. He taught a course. So we basically, probably about 1,200 people from different campuses interacted with us. We learned from them, right? I learned from them, and they learned from us. So I think it was probably one of the, in terms of a career, I think that was probably something that I would say was the best part of my career.
That must have been very helpful for the students.
Yeah, and we are still in touch. Yeah.
Yes. All right, moving on to the next question. How has globalization affected the discourse of post-colonial studies?
That's a really big question. I don't know how it has, but I mean, when people ask me about globalization, my next question to them is, what do you mean by it? Because I don't believe in cultural globalization. To me, globalization is what I call the neoliberal globalization. I mean, I don't call it, but I believe in it. So post-colonial studies, how does it impact it? I mean, we criticize it. Most post-colonial scholars will be opposed to neoliberalism and whatever is imposed on the developing nations through those mechanisms, what's happening in Pakistan right now. And my subspecialty is globalization and cosmopolitanism. So part of my critique always is, what happens to the developing nations or the third world countries as because of the debt and because of the policies of the metropolitan nations, and a critique of those. Now, it goes without saying that not everything can be impugned on to globalization. I mean, there are a lot of things that we ourselves need to take responsibility for in Pakistan, So overall, I think knowledge of neoliberal globalization and what it does and how it functions is really important for post-colonial scholars, because then we can understand the mechanics of macroeconomics that drives global politics and economy. And we can also, I've never used post-colonialism to write the stories of victimhood. I don't believe in that. I think post-colonialism is a liberatory field of study, and it's a field of study that is grounded in resistance. So when you study globalization from a post-colonial perspective, it's not offered to you as a cultural recipe for betterment. It is something that we critique, and that's how I think it is incorporated in the post-colonial studies.
So lastly, what advice would you give to the emerging scholars who are interested in post-colonial studies and wish to make a meaningful contribution to the field, including how to deal with challenges and navigating the academic landscape?
Read. Read as much as you can. You cannot be, absolutely cannot be an impactful scholar without reading. And enter a field with this humility that you don't know anything, and then constantly read, constantly. If you are you two graduate students or undergraduate?
Sir, we are about to complete our BS.
Okay. So if you are
Yes.
just studying the test papers and slides and notes and taking your exams and thinking, oh, I'm all that and a bag of chips, that's not going to make you a good scholar. A good scholar is someone who reads constantly, asks good questions, and then goes and thinks deeply about things, right? And I used to advise my graduate students to read, other than their coursework, to read 2 hours a day. Other than their coursework, I do that still. Read 2 hours a day, and in 5 years, you will start noticing the difference. You will know things that you wouldn't even know, how do I know it? You will understand things because that reading will become self-reflexive. It will point you to things. Your power to extrapolate from a line of theory will become highly developed. There is no shortcut to that. Okay. And then commit yourself to a cause, right? Don't just live for yourself, live for some larger cause. Faz, have you read Faz Ahmed Faz? Faz.
No,
आप
sir,
आप
we
तो अंग्रेजी
don't
के
cover
स्टूडेंट हो.
Urdu literature that much.
हाँ,
Yeah.
हाँ.
We
तो
actually recently
फैज
read
साहब की एक
Iqbal.
वो नज़म है ना कि जिस धज से कोई मक्तल में गया वो शान सलामत रहती है, right? So it's not how many battles you win that matters. It's how you enter the arena. So if you're a scholar, right, you see I speak very softly, right?
Yeah.
But when I enter the arena to dialogue with someone, it doesn't matter how brilliant they are, then that's where you enter and you say, okay, let's talk about it, right? And that gives you the advantage to do something in that kind of a scenario. In worst case scenario, you'll meet your wife and be married, because I had nothing when I met my wife except for my mind, and that's what impressed her.
Thank you so much, sir, for insightful and comprehensive answers. Now over to Dr. Hamza Qasim to carry out the rest of the interview session.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, I would like to praise you for being on the right side of history. I mean, you raise your voice for the issue and you express your opinion so bravely when so many people were not avoiding this topic and they were not willing to talk about it. So this thanks goes to you for speaking the truth, for being on the side of the oppressed.
No, thank you.
So the very first question is actually regarding the conflict, how your opinion changed over the period of time, like the point from where you started and how different episodes actually change your perspective towards the very issue.
Well, I won't call it a change. It would be sort of a shift. I've always been uh, a believer in Palestinian rights. I have always believed in the Palestinian right to self-determination. And when the October attacks happened, obviously I condemned them because I absolutely will never support any attacks on civilians and civilian installations, no matter how just a cause. I am not. I don't believe in that kind of revolution or fight. But then, when I started seeing what was happening in Gaza, I had to make a choice, as a scholar. And the choice is pretty simple. Remember previously when I mentioned to your question, what should we do as scholars, as public intellectuals? If we commit ourselves to a constituency that is less powerful and oppressed by powerful forces, then the decision becomes automatic. You don't even have to think much about it. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of the people who are being starved and killed, right? But the decision to publicly start building a body of work on the topic, not in the safe domain of academic journals and monographs, but in the public domain of YouTube and TikTok. That wasn't a light decision, because when you do something like that, when you put yourself out there, you will get thousands of people supporting you, but it's a perilous terrain and you get a lot of hate as well. And so the question you ask yourself is, am I willing to at least face that onslaught and still continue? But my decision was that I will start speaking in solidarity with the Palestinian people and then do whatever I can. वो अब कहते हैं ना, मुल्ला की दौड़ मस्जिद तक ही होती है ना. So where would a scholar go if he commits themselves to a cause, to what they can do publicly, right? So thankfully, I already had an established channel on YouTube, and I had somewhat of a good following where people knew that I wasn't just going to teach them how to write an essay. I'm a post-colonialist, so most of my material is already political. So when I made that shift, it wasn't a jarring shift for my audience, but people started responding to it, right? Think of it this way, and this is how much one person can contribute to the debate and about the rights of Palestinian people. I mean, I'm nobody, right? Technically, literally, I'm nobody. I'm not a professor. I'm not a powerful person, right? But there's only a few things I have, right? I have a mind that works, right? And a heart that is committed to a cause, right? And this $50 camera and a computer, right? These are the things that I am using to do all this. So suddenly then I started researching more, right? So think of it like I published 4 books. The last one is free for people to read. I don't think so more than 200 people in the world have read it, right? I've published 39 videos on Palestine so far. The one that I did on Fanon, looking at Palestine through Fanon, 80,000 people have watched that video. Can you imagine the reach?
Unbelievable.
Like for a scholar like me, an obscure scholar, to reach 80,000 people, right? I could have written an article and probably not reached 80,000 people. So that's the power of social media, right? And so that has become my cause, and it has kind of, given me hope that this kind of work needs to be done and can be done and should be done. So, as always, I've cast my lot with the people of Palestine.
A wonderful answer. And it's a very brave stance, actually. This is what we are thinking. You are risking a lot.
Well, brave are, brave are the people who are, surviving the onslaught, right? That's a different kind of bravery. With us, it's a different kind of courage that you need because you already know, okay, so I'm 59. No university wants to hire me. It doesn't matter how accomplished I am. The Pakistanis don't want to hire me because they know they can't control me, right? And now, with all these videos, a very large segment of American corporate sector and others, all someone will have to tell him is two words and, oh, he did this, and that's it. No one is going to research and say, well, does he make a rational argument? It's so easy to label people, right? I was talking to my wife earlier, and I was like, you know what? I think I've foreclosed all avenues that I could have to get a job. And she's like, that's why I married you. So, but that's the only risk I have. At the end of the day, I told you I'm a liberal humanist, but I have a very strong faith, right? And my faith is God sent me on this earth for a purpose, and He will feed me too.
How does the Palestinian struggle intersect with other global post-colonial movements? What is your stance on this?
So, the reason the question of Palestine and Palestinian struggle is central to all the struggles in the world because Palestinians are the only people in the world who are occupied and who have been occupied for 75 years and have suffered tremendously. But on their part, they've kept their national narrative alive. No one has been able to break their will, right? But on the global scale, they are also the people who are silenced deeply by the media, by United States, right? So these are the people who are suffering things that are war crimes, right? Provable war crimes. And so when you talk to South Africans, right, ANC leaders, there's a famous interview of Nelson Mandela when he had not yet become the president of South Africa, and he comes to America, and one of the leading journalists is interviewing him, and he asks him, what about your friendship with Yasser Arafat? And Mandela says, I am not going to come here and say that your enemy is my enemy too. That's beautiful. He's like, PLO taught us how to fight. They stood in solidarity with us in apartheid, and we will stand with them. I think that was a courageous moment because as a leader, he could have, prevaricated or hidden behind words, but he didn't. So I think Palestine as an issue and as a people is a question to this world, or to the world order. And the question is, here we are, oppressed, imprisoned, being destroyed. What are you going to do about it, right? They brought the Western civilization to crisis, and sadly, to whatever calls itself the Muslim civilization. So they pose this question to us, to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to Kuwait, to Pakistan. Where is your Muslim solidarity? What have you done for us? And same to the Western civilization. So it's central to the world in which we live in. And I hope that before I die, Palestine is free.
You are speaking from your heart, but do you think something like this can happen if
Oh,
we talk in terms of logics and
absolutely. Look, the thing is, the world is so cruel and unjust that our first instinct is always is is to surrender and say it's not going to happen. But we have to train ourselves, we have to train ourselves that hope is more powerful than despair. No, not a kind of naive hope, right? Not the kind of hope that says, someone is throwing me in a well and I'll remain hopeful. No, but the kind of hope that mobilizes us. Without hope and love, right, no revolution is possible. Without hope and love, no change is possible, right? That's why, like, the Taliban and all these people, why is their ideology bankrupt? Because there is no love in it, right? And these are, I mean, think of it, these are the followers of a prophet, right, who would not even speak loudly, right, and who was known for being a presence so that when he walked into a meeting, people's hearts felt filled, right? Who taught our men that being stern and unrelenting is a Muslim thing or a male thing, right? Why can't they be like that? So, hope for me is this idea that the world is going to throw at us what it throws at us. We can't stop it. But I, as an individual and as a scholar, I'm not going to give the world the satisfaction of saying we broke your will, right? That you can only do with hope.
of course, you're distributing hope and making us hopeful as well.
Mm-hmm. Not a delusional kind of hope, but hope.
Hope, adopting hope as a resistance strategy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Freire considers it one of the four components of revolutionary thought: dialogue, love, hope, and there's one more which I'm forgetting right now.
Next question is, in what ways the legacy of colonialism, do you think, the legacy of colonialism has affected the social and political structure in Palestine? Like how the very system of colonialism has shaped
Palestine is a prime example of what we call the settler colonialism, right? And there are counter arguments to those, but those are not valid arguments. So people from Europe came, evicted people who were living there, took their land, and declared themselves a country. Now, the Jewish people would tell you that, oh, we were persecuted. Of course, they were. And that this was their land promised to them by God. Fine. That still doesn't give a people a right to evict people who were already living there. It might give you the right to say, can we live with you as well? Because thousands of years ago, our ancestors' sacred places were here. But it does not give you the right to erase a people who already lived there. That is the ultimate tragedy of creation of State of Israel. Not that it was formed. I am for the State of Israel. But that on its originary moment, it thought that it needed to erase a people to exist. That's where the difference is, right? And that is a kind of a settler colonialism. And then if you look at what's happening in the West Bank, the settler movement, and what's happening in Gaza, what is it if not colonialism? I mean, I don't have any other vocabulary for it, right? And I don't want to use the vocabularies of the past, even though those could be applied to Gaza. And so I see it as a settler colonial state, as a militarized settler colonial state.
Due to like pro-Palestinians protest and everything, the world's perspective towards Israel has changed over the period of time. Or
Not
it's
the protest, not
or
just the
it's
protest. I mean, the world has seen what is happening. And a large segment of world population now knows what is happening. And the question is, can they rationalize it? So there are people who are rationalizing it still, and there are people who look at it and say, oh my God, I mean, this shouldn't be happening, right? So the student movement, the student protests are important because they are an expression of that outrage, right? And then people saying it that it is wrong is another. But for the first time in my lifetime in United States politics, people are openly supporting Palestine, right, in public places.
that's interesting.
And they are having a political impact.
Let me ask the last question. What are ways educators can integrate the history and present-day concerns of Palestine into their curriculum? Like how they can contribute to this issue?
You can just in an English classroom just pick up Mahmoud Darwish's identity card, right, and teach it and discuss it. You can pick up Edward Said's The Question of Palestine and teach it as a text. So what you're trying to teach your students is not this is your side and that is an evil side. I think that's not how it ought to be done. We have to remember and acknowledge that the Holocaust was the greatest 20th century tragedy. 9 million people were killed methodically. We have to acknowledge that the Jewish people suffered in it, absolutely. And that there is a thing called anti-Semitism that exists. And then we move on to teaching what is happening to Palestinian people and why is it happening to them. 1 million people were killed methodically. We have to acknowledge that the Jewish people suffered in it, absolutely. And that there is a thing called anti-Semitism that exists. And then we move on to teaching what is happening to Palestinian people and why is it happening to them. And so knowledge, I mean, how many, all of you know West Bank, like I just recorded a 30-minute video on West Bank. And there are you wouldn't believe there are people who are saying we have never seen these maps, right? The maps exist, UN produced them.
Yes, it's a detailed work.
But people never understand, oh, this West Bank, 21% is with the Palestinian Authority. The villages, the Palestinian villages are not under PA control directly. And they are surrounded by fencing of settlements. So suddenly you look at the map and you say, where is Palestine, right?
Yes.
And so if you just incorporate that, but the driving force has to be not hate for Israel, but love for the Palestinian people.
That's
Love
beautiful.
must be the driving force behind it.
Okay, actually, it's just the last video that made me more, I became sad after watching the last video that was related to the West Bank because I could not see the Palestine anywhere.
Yeah.
And I realized that they have planned everything and that's why I mentioned that. I'm so blessed.
वो तो
They're going to survive. And you said that, no, they're going to survive because if Palestinians are not willing to lose hope, why should I? And that was a beautiful message in itself.
You know, people have offered people in Gaza, we will take you out of there, right? And they refuse because the Palestinians know once they leave, they can never return. So that's part of the Palestinian identity of not leaving, because after the Nakba, the biggest regret they had was, why did we leave 500 villages, right? And so that's inscribed in Palestinian popular imagination, that leaving is failure. Questioning what does Palestine teach us? Like, we look at their resilience, their struggle, and then we ask ourselves, what are our struggles compared to that? Are there communities in our own country that are silenced, right? And that are not included in the national promise? And then what we can do about them.
Thank you very much for such wonderful insights. It's such a, heartwarming session. The session is ending. Thank you very much again.
बहुत शुक्रिया. खुदा हाफिज.
Khuda Hafiz.